All right, so now let's do the third economic system, and that is socialism. Now, what is socialism? To understand this word, let's go back in time to understand why people joined the socialist movement in the first place. Now, do you guys remember we talked about the capitalistic economy in the first round of this playlist? And in the capitalist economy, we saw that the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. So this is an example from the Industrial Revolution where the factory owners kept getting more and more money while they made these they made these workers work longer hours and they didn't pay them as much. And because the government was not allowed to intervene as much and there was more private owners and private ownership of the factories and business, there was no one to really protect these workers from their harsh working conditions and their unfair hours, unfair wages, and etc. So as a way to respond to this, the working class demanded change. And one of the things they did was they joined, some of them joined the communist movement, which we talked about earlier, and some of them joined the socialist movement. And those are two different forms of economic systems. They are similar in some ways, but different in others. So let's learn about socialism. What socialism basically means is that it's an economic system where the factors of production are owned by the government. And this is the key here, the government. And the main goal is to redistribute the wealth more fairly. So socialists believes that, look, if we leave the government completely out, we're going to have a few really, really rich people own the factors of production and not give any money to the poor people. But if we include the government and make sure that they are giving the wealth equally to everyone, then we can have a fair and more just society. So it's a little bit more idealistic, and some people argue that you can't really have a socialist government because it's too, how can you have every single person have equal amount of wealth, equal amount of money? It's just, some people argue it's impossible. But the idea at the time was that if we don't allow the government to take ownership, if we don't trust our government, then we're not going to have a fair and equal society. So what the socialists argued during this time is that they advocated for things like mines, businesses, factories, and railroads, things like this, to be owned by the public, which basically means to be owned by the government. They believed that if we allow the government or the public to own these things, then eventually this will give poor people a chance to be using these things and to a chance for poor people to have more money to be able to sustain themselves and have better lives. So socialists thus argued that the government should plan the economy rather than depend on capitalistic owners to do the job. So there are actually some examples of socialist countries today, and we're going to be talking about them in a little bit. But I want to first make the distinction again between capitalism and socialism for you to understand the difference. So I'm going to bring this chart from your textbook that you can actually also find on your textbooks, and it's on page 303. And in this chart you can see how the two are different. So in a capitalist economy, review, individuals and businesses own the property. In a socialist economy, it's the community or the government, the state, that should own the private property. Own property. Now, capitalist people believe that progress results when individuals, people, follow their own interest, but socialists think that we're going to have a better life and better society when the community, when the government is basically helping give wealth and distribute resources for everyone. So that's kind of the main difference between these two economic systems. And some examples of socialist countries are like Norway and Denmark, where you see a lot of these European countries like Sweden, they actually use the socialist economic system in different forms. And not all socialist societies look the same. So in some countries, for example, you're allowed to still make and sell whatever you want, but you have to follow strict rules. Also, in some socialist economies, you pay really high taxes, but in return, the government gives you free school, free healthcare, free daycare, free preschool, and there's a lot of middle class in